Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. We're here once again on Syracuse Basketball Postgame. Brent X, Mike Curtis with you after Syracuse falls to Duke. No comeback this time. Syracuse fell behind once again in the first half, fell behind big, but could not overcome that deficit this time as the Duke Blue Devils, I think, just hit two more three-pointers, Mike, in the open of this show. They hit a bunch of threes. Syracuse couldn't guard the three. That was really the story of the game. Matthew Williams, huge inside for Duke as well. And perhaps Duke is better without Jaylen Johnson. So Jim Boeheim was right about that. He didn't want to be right this time around, but Duke wins 85-71, and we are here on Facebook. We're here on YouTube. Don't forget, we also put the YouTube version of this when it's over in my recap on syracuse.com. You can find it on social media and on our Syracuse Orange Sports YouTube page as well. Mike and I will respond to your comments here shortly. But, Mike, this was a game that started off with a lot of buzz surrounding Jim Boeheim's comments on Thursday about Jaylen Johnson. Jay Billis responds to that. It becomes a thing throughout the weekend, comes into the game tonight. And as you wrote on syracuse.com, Jay Billis and Jim Boeheim did speak before the game. How did that go?
Yeah, he mentioned it early on in the broadcast, in the first few minutes. And he said they text back and forth actually on Friday when everything was going down. But Syracuse got to North Carolina last night, and he said that they spoke briefly, but he also said that there was really no air to clear. And they can be adults and they can disagree. But he still thinks that Jim Boeheim's comments about Jaylen Johnson's decision was kind of out of bounds.
I don't know. I think Jim gave an opinion that he thought the team was better without this certain player. Maybe if he worded it differently, maybe that they had just been playing better recently without Jaylen Johnson, maybe not like a broad stroke, like they're a better team without him, inferring like they're a better place without him. But, Mike, there is no question they're playing better without him. They're 4-0 without Johnson. The ball is distributed more. A lot of guys that weren't getting opportunities are getting them now, hitting three-pointers. And it was at the expense of Syracuse tonight. And so the Orange lose a shot at a quad one game. Joe Lenardi saying after the game on ESPN that they're not even in the first four out category. They're just completely off the board now. Whereas Duke is going in the opposite direction. And, Mike, given the number of huge games between Syracuse and Duke in recent years, it was weird that both teams came in wanting to basically stay on the bubble. But that was the case tonight. And let's go over some numbers here because, look, there's only really one number I need to tell you about, okay? There are other numbers. There are other stats. You can dig into this stuff. But here's what you need to know. Grab your digital red pen and circle this. Duke was 13 of 29 from three-point range. End of story. That's it right there. They hit 10 in the first half. Syracuse didn't even respond with their own three-pointer, I think, until like 5 minutes to go in the game. Mike, that was the story. Duke was getting, and not only were they hitting threes, they were open threes. They were uncontested threes. They were not challenged. They just took apart the Syracuse zone, mostly on the perimeter. But the other thing we have to mention statistically is, not only was Duke hitting its three-pointers, but Mark Williams inside he first of all played great defense on Quincy Guerrier and altered his game tonight. But Williams ends up with 18 points on the night, 9 of 11 inside, 11 rebounds. So he has a double-double. We mentioned three Duke players were in doubles before halftime, but Stewart ends up with 21 points. We mentioned Williams with 18, Hurt with 15. Roach hit some three-pointers tonight. He ends up with 14 on the night. For Syracuse, Buddy Boeheim led the way with 21 points. A lot of that came when Syracuse was out of reach. Marek Dolezaj with 13 points. Kadari Richmond, Mike, was a bright spot off the bench. And not only does he come in for Joe Girard pretty early in the game, a rarity in that he starts for Joe Girard in the second half. So maybe we're really starting to see the transition here. Jim Boeheim's going to die on that Joe Girard hill, but eventually he's got to give way to Kadari Richmond, and maybe we're starting to see that now.
Yeah, that was really interesting to see him start the second half, and it kind of changed the complexion of how they play. Anytime Kadari comes in, he kind of changes how the Orange's momentum is going. on defense and on offense. So he gives you a player who can guard that high at the top of the zone. And then on offense, he also has the ability to drive and distribute to his teammates, which Boeheim had some pretty interesting comments in his presser. And he said every time Kadari drives, he's just looking to make a play for himself pretty much. But I think he tried to get his teammates involved as much as he could. They just couldn't knock down shots.
Right. In the second half, Duke certainly paid more attention to him, kind of altered his path to the basket. But speaking of interesting things that Jim said in the press conference, Mike, on the defense, quote, it's got nothing to do with our guards. Our forwards are not playing defense. They're not covering. They're not coming up. They're not playing defense. Okay, that may be the case, but how can a team hit 13 3-pointers and it has nothing to do with the guards, right? There's got to have something to do with the guards, not putting their hands up, not getting up on the shooters, not extending out. Jim is absolutely right to say that Quincy Guerrier and Alan Griffin were much more interested on the offensive end tonight, Griffin in particular. Jim admitted there was a starter in the locker room at halftime that admitted he didn't play defense in the first half of this game. And Jim also saying at his press conference, amongst notable things about his team, not about another team in Duke, that, let me find it here, quote, some guys are more focused on their offense. We can't have that. So, look, Jim is always going to give you the truth serum. He's always going to call it like he sees it. But we're this far down the road, and you have a team flat out admitting they're disinterested in playing defense at Cameron Indoor Stadium on Big Monday in a game they absolutely had to have. And, Mike, this was another slow start for Syracuse. I mean, think about 47 points against NC State that they put up against Syracuse. Notre Dame, Syracuse came back and won that game, but they scored, 46 in the first half. The Pittsburgh game, you go back a bit, 64 in the first half. Duke with 52 tonight. This has been a common theme for this team this season.
Yeah, this was the biggest game of the season for the Orange, and it could have been a very important win for their NCAA tournament resume. But the Orange just they didn't come out and treat it as such. They looked really tired at times. They looked worn out, probably from playing that press so much. Yep. But I was in the Duke presser, and Mark Williams actually said, like, despite their quick turnaround, because they had just had a big win over Virginia on Saturday, they still were well prepared for this game tonight. Coach K has battled Jim Boeheim for a while now, and he knows how Boeheim likes to use his zone. He knows when he's typically going to use his press when he gets down big. So that team was well prepared, and they wanted to control the pace of this game. And you saw that like right off the jump, because I think on Duke's first play, they got a lob to Williams for a dunk, and pretty much the game was over from that point.
And that's a repeat, Mike, of what Notre Dame did on Saturday. It was Durham in the middle and in the paint. What is it? 4 of his first 5 shots were dunks.
Yeah.
And then Syracuse has to adjust. Notre Dame's got, 4 guys that shoot over 30% from three-point range, and they just kick it out to the threes. Now, the difference was Notre Dame struggles against the press. They wilted under the press. They had lost a 17-point lead to Georgia Tech prior to even losing a 20-point lead against Syracuse. But Duke's not going to wilt under the press, and you noted it. Syracuse. This is Jim Boeheim's fear in playing the press, by the way, and he bore out to be right on this too. They get tired, and they get tired easily. Now, Jim doesn't go to his bench to supplant people to do that, but even the guys that were great in the press the other night, Robert Braswell, who was pretty good on defense tonight, I'll give him that, but just wasn't the same, right? Because Duke was in full control of this game. So you're just running out of options there if you're Jim Boeheim. There's limitations on this team. They lost a quad 1 opportunity. Yeah, they get one against Georgia Tech, but a Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech combination is not going to be enough to get you back on the board. I mean, Mike, Syracuse's NCAA tournament chances probably died tonight at Cameron. And I got to be careful about that, because Syracuse just seems to rise from the dead like a horror movie character when you think they're down. But this is one they had to get. And you know what? Put all the optics and the numbers and quads and all that aside. They just didn't look good on national television against the most high-profile team in college basketball, even one having a down year. So that's going to stick in people's minds when they're deciding who to put in and out of the tournament, even if Syracuse wins out the rest of the way.
Yeah, and like you said, if Syracuse wins out the rest of the way, I think they would still have to win out in the ACC tournament
on top of that, right? Yeah,
in order to even make the tournament. So if they put together a stretch of wins and get hot, and that carries over to the ACC tournament and they're the champion, then they could very much make the tournament.
Well, that's what we have to say. I'm sure you guys have, and gals for that matter, have a lot to say in the comments. So let's hop in there. And thanks for watching tonight, wherever you're watching us tonight. Remember, we're here live after every Syracuse basketball game. And we do archive this on YouTube in case you miss it and want to watch it later. Mike, I wanted to note there too, also, what is it about? Are the clocks off at the Mello Center? Because the Syracuse women's basketball team also really struggles in the first half of games. I don't know what it is, what's going on in that building with that. And there's one more thing I wanted to ask you before we go to the comments. What was the presser like for Duke in terms of the Jaylen Johnson hullabaloo? It seems like it didn't really come up on that side of things.
Yeah, it was strictly about basketball. Duke brought out Mark Williams and Coach K, and pretty much every reporter asked them a basketball-related question, especially since they had a kind of quick turnaround coming off that Virginia game. They asked them how they wanted to kind of attack that zone and how they were able to be successful against the press, but no questions about Jaylen Johnson were asked. And it's kind of interesting because Coach K said, or at least Sean McDonough noted during the broadcast, that when he was asked about Jaylen Johnson or Jim Boeheim's comments, he said, "I'll let Jim's comments speak for themselves."
Okay, there you go. And that was that. On to the next controversy, right?
Yeah.
Chris says, watching Duke's ball movement, you can tell they're a well-disciplined team. When you watch Syracuse's ball movement, there is none. That's something that Jay Billis said during the broadcast, non-Jaylen Johnson related, Mike, that there was a quote that he had, and I tweeted it because it's pretty much what Syracuse fans have said a lot during the season. And it was basically, let me find it here to quote.
What kind of shot was that?
Accurately. It pretty much, yeah, what kind of offense are we running here? Here it is. What were they doing on that offensive possession? Said every Syracuse fan several times this year, right? A lot of people saying that Joe Girard's got to hit the bench. Dave brings up a good stat here, too. Dave, thanks for pointing this out. Duke, 27 assists on 34 field goals. Woo! That is ball movement right there.
That's efficient. That's highly efficient.
Very efficient. Syracuse, by the way, 10 assists on 28 made field goals. Ira says the announcer spent 10 minutes bashing coach, and then Braswell went to the line, and the announcer says, quote, "He's actually a good shooter, just not in games." Well, Jim Boeheim actually reiterated that in his press conference. Braswell makes a bunch in practice, doesn't always translate into the game. Brandon doesn't like the zone, says it's old, has to go. Dave says Griffin's been a non-factor the last two games. Yeah, Mike, that's strange to me in that it's now 2 games in a row, 2 big games, that Alan Griffin has not been a factor. And maybe Jim hinted at it there, that there's just players, forwards, more interested in their offense than their defense. Griffin has always kind of been up and down on the defensive end. He's got a lot of blocks. He's made some plays defensively this year, but isn't always in the right place, which, you know, look, we're how many games down the road here, over 20 games in, that adjustment period is almost over. It has to be over for Alan Griffin. He's got to know where to be at this point. It just doesn't look like that's happened, but offensively, he's been off the last 2 games as well.
Yeah, he's pretty inconsistent on both sides of the floor, especially over these last 2 games. And you can tell he wants to take that shot. He wants to be the guy for Syracuse, but sometimes he just doesn't know where to be in terms of the offense, because the ball has to go to Girard, it has to go to Buddy, it has to go to Quincy, it has to go to Marek. And then so by the time he gets the ball, it looks like he just makes up his mind and says, "Oh, I got the ball, I'm about to take this shot."
Bill's watching us from Nashville and says, "Guys, been a fan since the 70s. I want this team to win as much as anyone." Shout out to you, my friend. And Mike loves Nashville. They now have the lack of recruiting. The players are not developed, lack of bigs, and coaches currently have the ability to coach the bigs up. And he's just sad to see the program sink to where it's at. Now, the bigs thing is interesting, Mike, because Benny Williams comes in next year. He's a 5-star recruit. Brandon Huntley, I believe I'm saying that correctly, is a 2022 big man. You've covered recruiting for us a little bit, Mike, and if they can get him, class of 2022, it's on now. It's not that Syracuse lacks big men on the roster. It's just a lot of development players. Whereas, is it Huntley Hatley or the other way around? He's got a hyphen.
It's actually Huntley Hatfield.
Hatfield. There you go. I knew I was close. If they can get him, game on. That's a big man that Syracuse could really use.
Yeah, and Syracuse doesn't attract a lot of 5-star talent. So like you said, if they can get him, it would be a complete game changer for the program, and he'd probably be the highest recruit since Carmelo Anthony.
He's a big target for Syracuse. By the way, there was a player in the class of 2022 prior, Jaylen Johnson, that fit that very description you just said. But as we saw a few months ago, he decided to opt out from Syracuse and is probably not going to end up playing college ball at all the way his path is going, but we'll see how that ends up. Paul says if Boeheim dies on the Joe Girard Hill, at least he'll I shouldn't read that. That's not a good comment. Don't say that. Be nice. Christian says the forwards are, I shouldn't laugh. That's not funny. The forwards are asked to do too much to cover for the guards. Now that's a great point. Now the guards are not blameless here, but what Christian brings up is the responsibility. The guards come up, have to have their hands up, have to take up a certain amount of space, but the scrambling the forwards have to do to cover that ground is a lot. And then when you have Marek Dolezaj in the middle, God bless the guy. He's just doing everything he possibly can, but Marek only covers so much ground. Watching him try to cover Williams tonight just goes to show you why Syracuse needs a true big man and why that paint presence has really been their Achilles heel this year, Mike.
Yeah, and Boeheim mentioned it in the presser, like Quincy has to do a better job on the defensive front and guarding those big athletic forwards. And I don't want to cape for him, but he's still a sophomore and he has a lot of growing to do. I know a couple of experts have him saying that he could leave for the NBA draft, but I think we need to slow down on those conversations and allow him to like truly develop.
Definitely. And for something about the first half with Quincy too. Now in the Notre Dame game, he was a lot better in the second half. Frankly, a lot of rebounds kind of landed in his lap because Notre Dame was missing a bunch of shots. He was kind of grabbing those like rainbow shots that bounce off the back of the rim. Right. But he did get a lot of offensive rebounds in that game as well. And look, Quincy's a great player, but you said there's still a lot of development there. Jim was saying it in his press conference. He's still not what he needs to be around the basket. And we saw it tonight. Williams, a freshman, by the way, but a talented freshman, altered a lot of Quincy shots. And remember, when Quincy came to Syracuse, he was a shooter. He can hit the three. We've seen it. He was that kind of offensive-minded player. Syracuse has tried to make him into a true big man, a true forward down there, and that is still a work in progress at this point.
Hey, Brent, one stat I did want to highlight is the rebounding department. Syracuse only got out-rebounded by 2, and they were down by 24.
That's incredible to think.
39-37 was the final tally, but it's crazy for a team that doesn't typically rebound the ball well, that they were able to kind of stay close in that department, but get blown out. And that just show how much the three-pointer hurt them tonight.
Exactly. And that rebounding has been the tell for Syracuse this year. They're undefeated when they out-rebound an opponent. I think they've only won a game, the NC State game, where they were out-rebounded by 2, just like they were tonight. But rebounding almost didn't matter in this one with all the three-point shots and the ball movement that Duke had, those 27 assists, as we brought up earlier. Yeah. A couple of comments there mentioning Kadari Richmond. We brought it up a moment ago, Mike. Look, he's the better player. He needs to be out there. I think Girard would actually be better in a bench role, coming off the bench, sparking this team when needed, hitting threes, but he's just a liability defensively. He cannot guard anybody. And Duke had smaller guards out there. And look, Joe's had some steals. He's had some defensive plays this year, but you can't tell me that a Kadari Richmond, Buddy Boeheim, top of the zone, 6'6", and what's Kadari, 6'5", but a huge wingspan.
Yeah,
is better is not better, I should say, than Joe and Buddy. It's just they all have a role. We agreed, but Joe's just playing himself off the court at this point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how this pans out for these last few games going into the ACC tournament, and especially how it pans out next season. when they have an entire offseason to kind of get better. I'm pretty sure Kadari will work on his shot like crazy this offseason. We haven't seen him take a three-pointer in God knows how long. So it'll be interesting to see how they come back next season.
By the way, Kadari hit a 3 in this game, so slowly but surely it seems to be coming along.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah. Blink and you miss it, right? He's going to put in a lot of work in the offseason, you said, on a shot. Somebody brought this up. Chris says, imagine if we had Carey and Goodine still here. Departures have killed this team the last 4 years. I'll meet you halfway on that, Chris. I think Bryson Goodine might help this team. I just don't think Jalen Carey helps this team. He goes to Rhode Island. He's not a factor there. He's one of those guys that didn't work out, right? And Gerard replaced him in the lineup last year after 2 really quick games. And I get what you're saying about players that have left and maybe done well elsewhere, but I'll meet you halfway on that. Carey, no, but maybe Goodine could help this team. But Jim always cuts off his rotation at 6 or 7 players anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter in some ways. Rob asks, any draft talk for Alan Griffin? And Rob, I saw your question earlier about Barama Sidibe. So, Mike, I think we're pretty much under the impression Barama is not going to play again the rest of the season, or we'd be seeing him out there. So to answer your question there, Rob, Alan Griffin draft, not this year, but I think he's a draftable player, certainly.
Yeah, I don't see it now, honestly, but maybe he could develop into that type of player. He definitely looks like he has the offensive and defensive capabilities when he wants to. I think it's just about that mentality of turning that switch on, of always giving the same amount of effort all the time. I
think Griffin could go down that Elijah Hughes role if he tightens up some things in his game, particularly defensively, as you said, when he wants. But he could be a mid to late second round pick because teams are always looking for shooters like that, wings like that. That player is kind of in demand. Second round picks, kind of supplanting some rosters. By the way, I got to catch up on our guy Elijah Hughes in the Utah Jazz. That's the best team in the NBA is. Have you seen Mike? I haven't been following.
I haven't seen him.
Is he on the roster? I'll have to check up on that.
Yeah, he's still on the roster. I think he played the first couple games of the season, but hasn't seen much action since. But another Syracuse alum that's kind of lighting it up lately is Carmelo Anthony.
And Jeremy Grant, certainly.
And Jeremy Grant, for sure.
Unbelievable.
He's probably going to be All-Star reserve this year.
Absolutely.
If the coaches get it right.
They better. That's a good note to end on there, Mike. So we will be back at it Saturday. Syracuse plays Georgia Tech. That is another road game. That is another quad one opportunity for Syracuse. Although, again, this was kind of the big one to circle on the calendar. But Syracuse's back is certainly against the wall here as it tries to prove it belongs in the NCAA tournament. As we speak tonight, it certainly doesn't, but there's still a few games to be played here. Maybe Clemson gets added onto the schedule. Another opportunity there for the Orange. Thanks for watching wherever you were tonight. We appreciate that. Check out all of our great coverage from Mike Waters, Donna DeToda, Mike, myself, the great photos and all the coverage coming your way. And we will be back at it Saturday after the Orange take on the Yellow Jackets. In the meantime, you guys enjoy the rest of your week. And Mike, you do the same.
You too.